As I sat across from Dan in that small cafe, years after vanishing without a word, his words struck like lightning. Susan's affair became public. She lost everything. Emily hasn't spoken to her since, blaming her for everything, even your disappearance. The fallout of their betrayal had unraveled in ways I could never have imagined. I left thinking I'd never look back, but hearing how the truth finally surfaced brought a mix of closure and shock. The life I left behind had crumbled, but I had rebuilt something stronger. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching this from in the comments below. If you're enjoying this tale, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter. The night carried an air of calm predictability, the kind that wraps a home in quiet reassurance. After a long day at work, I trudged upstairs, craving the solace of my bed. The comforting rhythm of family life played out around me. Susan's gentle laughter floated up from the living room, blending with the sitcom's laugh track. In her usual spot on the couch, she was likely wrapped in her favorite blanket, sipping tea, a picture of serene contentment. Emily's voice filtered through the hallway from her room, a cheerful melody of teenage chatter. I paused briefly, leaning against the banister, letting the sounds of my home envelop me. These moments, though mundane, were the kind I cherished, fragments of a life built on trust and routine. Heading to Emily's room, I knocked lightly and peeked in, intending to say goodnight. She was sprawled on her bed, phone in hand, completely immersed in her conversation. Her tone was casual, almost dismissive as she spoke. "Yeah, my mom was with him again last weekend." The words hung in the air, strange and sharp against the backdrop of the ordinary. My heart stilled, and a creeping unease replaced the calm. What had she just said? And who was she talking about? I froze outside Emily's door, my hand hovering near the frame, unsure whether to move forward or step back. The casual tone of her words still echoed in my ears, their weight slowly sinking in. My mind raced, desperate to make sense of what I'd just heard. My mom was with him again last weekend. The words felt foreign, out of place in the sanctuary of our home, yet impossible to ignore. I leaned closer, careful to remain unnoticed. My heart thudded loudly in my chest, a deafening drumbeat of dread. Emily's voice, still light and carefree, continued, each word striking like a dagger. "Yeah, she's been seeing him for a while now. She doesn't even try to hide it anymore." I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just the possibility of betrayal. It was the ease with which my daughter spoke of it, as though it were an accepted part of our lives. My hands gripped the edge of the doorframe, knuckles turning white as I fought the urge to burst in and demand answers. "He even tells me to cover for her sometimes," Emily added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Like, if Dad asks, he'd never believe it anyway." A bitter laugh escaped her, and something inside me snapped. I stepped back quickly, pressing my fist to my mouth to stifle the sound threatening to escape. My breath came shallow, uneven. I felt an unfamiliar mix of emotions coursing through me. Shock that this was happening, anger that I hadn't seen the signs, and a profound sadness that Emily had become part of the lie. I backed away slowly, my body trembling. Each step felt like walking on glass, sharp and painful. I retreated to the hallway, leaning against the wall for support. The realization of what I'd overheard began to crystallize, each piece falling into place like a cruel puzzle I couldn't unsee. Susan wasn't just my wife. She was the anchor of my life, the person I thought I knew better than anyone. Yet here I was, standing in the shadows of my own home, listening to my daughter casually confirm that Susan had been seeing someone else. And Emily, my Emily, knew. She knew and had chosen silence, choosing loyalty to her mother over honesty with me. The betrayal felt deeper than anything I'd ever known. It wasn't just Susan who had broken my trust. It was my daughter, the person I had protected, loved, and raised to value truth above all else. That betrayal cut into a place I didn't even know existed, leaving me hollow and raw. I stumbled downstairs, my mind spinning. Susan sat on the couch, her face lit up by the glow of the television. She laughed at something on the screen, her expression untroubled, as though nothing in the world could disturb her peace. The sight of her, so calm, so ordinary, made my stomach churn. I sat on the edge of the armchair across the room, careful to keep my face neutral. The words I wanted to say burned in my throat, but I swallowed them down. Blowing up now, without proof, would only give her an escape route. She'd deny it, turn it around, and leave me questioning my own sanity. No, I couldn't let that happen. Instead, I forced myself to sit there, quiet and still, as my world unraveled. My eyes drifted back to her, taking in every detail. The way she tucked her legs beneath her, the easy smile playing on her lips. How long had this been going on? How many times had she left this house, lying to me? And how many times had Emily been complicit, spinning stories to keep me in the dark? That night, I lay in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief and pain. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, as though nothing in her world had changed. But for me, everything had. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had become a stranger. And Emily, my own flesh and blood, had chosen sides. And it wasn't mine. Today wasn't just a momentary lapse. It was a carefully constructed facade, maintained with lies and silence. As I lay there, staring into the dark, I felt something harden within me, a resolve to uncover the full truth, no matter how painful. I knew then that I couldn't confront them yet. I needed more than words. I needed proof. As the hours stretched into the silence of the night, I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped tightly, staring at the floor. Susan lay beside me, her breathing slow and even, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. My chest felt heavy, each breath a struggle as I replayed Emily's words in my mind. Yeah, my mom was with him again last weekend. The casual way she had said it, like it was a mundane detail, tore at me. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms until the sting brought me back to the present. Confronting Susan now, waking her up and demanding answers, was tempting. But what would that accomplish? She'd deny it, she'd twist the truth, accuse me of overreacting, and leave me with more questions than answers. I couldn't let her control the narrative. I needed evidence, something irrefutable. My thoughts drifted to the life we had built together. I remembered our wedding day vividly, the way she smiled as we exchanged vows, the warmth in her eyes that I had believed was meant only for me. I thought of the nights we spent dreaming of our future, imagining the family we'd raise, the home we'd create. Every memory felt like a cruel joke now, tainted by the revelation of her betrayal. I rubbed my temples trying to quiet the memories, but they came unbidden. I saw her holding Emily as a baby, her face glowing with love and pride. I remembered the birthday parties we threw together, the holidays spent as a family, the countless little moments that had made me believe in us. How much of it had been real? How long had she been lying to me while pretending to share those moments? The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was the shattering of the trust we'd spent years building. And Emily, my daughter. The thought of her knowing, of her actively helping Susan hide this, cut deeper than I thought possible. I had always been her protector, her guide. I had taught her to value honesty, to stand up for what was right. Yet, when faced with this choice, she had chosen her mother's deception over me. I stood and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. The faint glow of the streetlights illuminated the empty road, a stark contrast to the chaos within me. I thought about the nights Susan had gone out, telling me she was meeting friends or attending events. I had never questioned her, never doubted her words. My trust had been implicit, unshakable. Now, that trust felt like a weakness, a blind spot she had exploited. I felt a bitter smile tug at my lips. She had played her role well, weaving her lies so seamlessly into our lives that I had never seen the cracks. But now I saw everything. I resolved to keep my silence for now. Confrontation without proof would give her an advantage. She could dismiss my suspicions, manipulate the narrative, and make me question my own instincts. I wouldn't let that happen. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal. As I returned to bed, I lay still, staring at the ceiling. My mind churned with a mix of anger, heartbreak, and a cold, determined clarity. The life I thought I knew was gone, and the woman beside me was a stranger. But I wasn't defeated. Not yet. The house was silent. The only sounds, the faint ticking of the wall clock and Susan's steady breathing from the bedroom. My heart pounded as I moved quietly, determined to find the truth. Each step felt heavy, burdened by a mix of fear and anger, but I forced myself forward. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was survival. I needed answers, no matter how painful. I started in her office, a small space tucked into the corner of the house. It was a place I rarely entered, respecting her privacy, as I always had. Tonight, though, privacy was no longer an option. My hands shook slightly as I opened the first drawer, sifting through mundane items. Pens, notepads, unopened envelopes, nothing unusual. In the second drawer, tucked beneath a pile of papers, I found it. A receipt for a restaurant on the other side of town. The date stood out immediately. It was from a night she had told me she was out with friends. The restaurant wasn't just any place. It was an upscale venue we only visited on special occasions. I stared at the receipt, my chest tightening. My mind raced, imagining the scene, her sitting across from him, smiling, laughing, while I sat at home believing her lies. I carefully placed the receipt back, closing the drawer softly. My movements became more methodical, my focus sharpening despite the ache growing in my chest. I moved to her bag, which hung on the back of her chair. Rifling through the contents felt invasive, wrong even, but the need for the truth pushed me forward. Inside, I found another piece of evidence, a lipstick-stained napkin with the restaurant's logo printed neatly in the corner. My jaw clenched as I held it, the tangible proof deepening the wound. Returning to our bedroom, I glanced at her sleeping form. She looked peaceful, as though her world was perfectly intact. The sight of her calmness stoked the anger simmering inside me, but I pushed it down. I had to stay focused. Her phone lay on the nightstand, its screen dark. My fingers hesitated, hovering over it. Unlocking it felt like crossing a line, but after everything, I knew I had no choice. I keyed in the passcode, one I'd seen her use countless times, and the screen lit up. The messages were there, unmistakable in their intimacy. A man named D filled the screen with words I couldn't unread. Last night was incredible. I miss you already. Another, when can we meet again? Each text felt like a knife, twisting deeper. My grip tightened around the phone as my breath came shallow, my world crumbling with every swipe. As if the messages weren't enough, I found the burner phone in a small box beneath her nightstand. My hands trembled as I powered it on, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. The screen came to life, and with it, a flood of texts from D. They spoke of secret meetings, shared plans, and declarations of affection. One text read, "I wish we didn't have to sneak around anymore." The evidence was irrefutable. Each discovery felt like a blow, a confirmation of the betrayal I had desperately hoped wasn't true. My chest ached with a mixture of heartbreak and rage. How could she do this? How could she create an entire world outside of our marriage, weaving lies so effortlessly, while I remained oblivious? I powered off the burner phone and placed it back carefully, my mind a storm of emotions. As I stood there in the dark, the weight of it all pressed down on me. The woman I had trusted, the mother of my child, had not only betrayed me, but had made a mockery of the life we had built. The truth was undeniable now, and as much as it tore me apart, I knew this was only the beginning. Confrontation would come, but not yet. First, I needed to be certain that I had everything. Sitting alone in the darkened kitchen, I gripped a mug of untouched coffee, staring blankly at the swirling patterns on the surface. The house was silent, yet my mind roared with chaos. Every muscle in my body screamed for release, for confrontation. But I knew better. Bursting into accusations now would only allow Susan to weave more lies, to deny what was clear to me. I had to be smarter than my anger, sharper than my heartbreak. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the mug until the ceramic edge pressed painfully into my palm. The pain grounded me, forcing my thoughts into focus. Susan's betrayal was no longer a question but a reality, and Emily's involvement made it all the more unbearable. But if I acted impulsively, I'd lose the upper hand. I needed to ensure that when the truth came out, it was undeniable. I pushed the mug aside and reached for a notebook tucked into the corner of the counter. With a steady hand, I began writing. Details of the receipts, messages, dates, times, everything I'd uncovered. Each word felt like a weight being added to my chest, but it was necessary. This was my proof, my shield against her inevitable denials. The memories of our life together resurfaced as I wrote. I thought of the first time we brought Emily home from the hospital, Susan's tearful smile as she held her close. I remembered the quiet evenings spent planning vacations, laughing over little jokes, and feeling like the world outside couldn't touch us. Now, every one of those moments felt poisoned, a cruel illusion hiding the cracks beneath the surface. The pen stilled in my hand as my thoughts shifted. This wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about my future, about reclaiming my life from the lies that had consumed it. A quiet resolve took hold of me. I couldn't stay here, not in this house, not in this life built on deceit. I had to leave, but not before ensuring I was prepared. Over the next few nights, I moved carefully, quietly. I began transferring money to a private account, leaving just enough in our joint accounts to avoid suspicion. I secured a small storage unit and packed away personal items, things that mattered only to me, untouched by the stain of our shared life. Each action felt like a small step toward freedom, a chance to rebuild somewhere far from the shadows of betrayal. By the time I closed the notebook and stashed it safely away, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The anger still simmered, the heartbreak lingered, but now it was accompanied by something new: determination. This wasn't just about escaping Susan's lies. It was about finding myself again, starting fresh, and I would do it on my terms. The realization hit me late one night as I sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, staring at the empty spaces in my life where trust used to reside. Confronting Susan would be futile. She'd deny everything, twist the truth, and make me question my own reality. Emily's complicity only deepened the wound, her betrayal wrapping itself around me like a suffocating fog. I couldn't stay. The life we'd built, the family I thought I knew, was gone. All that remained was a hollow shell, and I needed to escape before it consumed me entirely. My hands trembled as I logged into our bank accounts late that night, the glow of the screen illuminating the quiet determination on my face. I meticulously transferred enough money to a private account, careful not to raise any alarms. I left a reasonable amount in the joint accounts, just enough to keep up appearances. Each click of the mouse felt like a severed thread, cutting me loose from the web of lies that had ensnared me. I thought of the life we'd shared, the vacations, the lazy Sunday mornings, the laughter that once filled this home. The memories felt distant now, like someone else's life I'd merely observed from the outside. My jaw tightened as I clicked submit on the final transfer. This wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming control over my own future. In the days that followed, I moved like a shadow through my own home. After Susan and Emily went to bed, I quietly packed a few essentials into a duffel bag hidden in the back of my closet. Photographs of my parents, a watch my father had given me, and a few books that had carried me through difficult times. These were the pieces of my past I wanted to keep. I left behind anything tied to Susan or Emily, their presence now too painful to carry with me. I began researching places far from here, somewhere quiet and unassuming. A small coastal town caught my attention. A place with rugged cliffs, the smell of salt in the air, and no connection to my current life. It felt like the kind of place where I could disappear and start over, where the weight of betrayal might finally lift. One night, as I walked through the house, I found myself standing in Emily's room. The sight of her childhood drawings still pinned to the corkboard made my chest ache. I remembered the nights I'd tucked her in, reading her favorite bedtime stories until she fell asleep. I thought of the times she'd run to me with scraped knees, trusting me to make everything better. That little girl was gone now, replaced by someone I'd barely recognized. Someone who had chosen deceit over honesty. I stepped into the room, my fingers brushing against one of her drawings. A stick figure family, smiling under a bright sun. My vision blurred as tears welled up, the betrayal cutting deeper than I thought possible. "Why?" I whispered into the silence, my voice trembling. There was no answer, just the quiet hum of the house around me. The night before my planned departure, I sat in the living room staring at the darkened TV. Susan had gone to bed hours ago, her betrayal hidden behind a mask of calm routine. I thought of all the moments I'd trusted her implicitly, the times she'd laughed, kissed me, and promised a love that now felt like a lie. The anger simmered beneath the surface, but it was no longer the driving force. It was the sorrow, the emptiness that pushed me forward. I stood and walked to the house one last time, my footsteps echoing softly in the dark. I touched the walls, the furniture, the memories embedded in every corner. This had been my home, my sanctuary, but now it felt like a prison. As I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching Susan sleep, I felt a strange mixture of loss and relief. This chapter of my life was ending, and I was ready to turn the page. At dawn, I grabbed my bag and quietly slipped out the front door. The air was crisp, the neighborhood still asleep. As I climbed into my car, I glanced back at the house one last time. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the home I had built, now filled with shadows I could no longer face. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, a tear sliding down my cheek as I whispered to no one, "Goodbye." Then, with a deep breath, I started the engine and drove away, the road ahead stretching endlessly. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I felt something stir within me. Freedom. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself, and that, I realized, was enough. The morning air was crisp and still as I stood at the threshold of the house, the duffel bag slung over my shoulder feeling heavier than its contents should allow. The first hints of dawn crept across the sky, casting a soft, golden glow over the quiet neighborhood. The house behind me was silent, its occupants still lost in the comfort of sleep, unaware that by the time they awoke, I would be gone. My fingers brushed the doorframe as I took a final look inside. The hallway I had walked through countless times now felt foreign, the memories within its walls tainted by betrayal. The faint scent of coffee and Susan's favorite lavender candle still lingered, clinging stubbornly to the space as if trying to hold me back. I paused, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. A flood of images swept through my mind. Susan's laughter, Emily's first steps, family dinners filled with warmth and love. These were the moments I had cherished, the foundation of a life I thought was unshakable. But now, every memory felt hollow, a mirage built on lies. I inhaled deeply, the cool morning air sharpened my lungs, grounding me. This wasn't just an escape, it was a reclamation. I stepped outside, the door clicking shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest. The gravel crunched softly beneath my feet as I walked to the car parked discreetly down the street. I placed the bag in the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel tightly. For a moment, I simply sat there, staring ahead at the empty road, the enormity of my decision sinking in. A tear slipped down my cheek, unbidden but welcome, carrying the weight of the years I was leaving behind. I didn't wipe it away. This mix of sadness and liberation was mine to feel, a testament to both the pain of betrayal and the strength it took to walk away. With a deep breath, I turned the key in the ignition, the car humming to life. The road stretched out before me, infinite and uncertain, but filled with possibility. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, its outline fading into the morning haze. I didn't look back again. This was my moment to move forward, to leave behind the shadows and step into the light of a new beginning. The small coastal town welcomed me with a quiet charm that immediately began to mend the fractures in my soul. It was the kind of place where life moved slowly, where mornings began with the sound of waves crashing against the shore, and evenings ended with the sun dipping into an endless horizon. The salt-laden breeze felt like a balm, carrying with it a promise of peace and simplicity that I hadn't felt in years. My apartment was modest, perched on a hill with a view of the ocean that seemed to stretch forever. It was sparsely furnished at first, just a bed, a table, and a single chair. But it was enough. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I relished the quiet. No whispered conversations behind closed doors. No lies hiding in plain sight. Just me, the sound of the waves, and the freedom to rebuild on my own terms. Mornings became sacred rituals. I'd wake early, brew a strong cup of coffee, and sit on the small balcony overlooking the water. The rhythmic pull of the tide mirrored my breathing, steady and calm, washing away the bitterness that had once consumed me. With every sunrise, the grip of my past loosened, making room for something new. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself drawn to the trails that wound through the cliffs and forests surrounding the town. Hiking became my escape, a way to lose myself in the beauty of the natural world. The crunch of gravel underfoot, the scent of pine, and the distant cry of seagulls reminded me that life, despite its wounds, carried on. Each step forward on those trails felt like a step away from the man I had been, trapped in betrayal and anger. Photography, a hobby I had long abandoned, also found its way back into my life. With an old camera slung over my shoulder, I began capturing the quiet beauty of the town, the sunlit waves, the craggy cliffs, the weathered boats in the harbor. The act of framing each shot brought a sense of control and clarity, a way to see the world through a new lens. Despite my initial desire for solitude, the town's community began to pull me in. It started small, a neighbor waving as I passed by, the barista at the local cafe remembering my order. These simple interactions felt foreign at first, but they chipped away at the walls I had built around myself. Slowly, I allowed myself to engage. I joined a local photography group, initially to share my work, but eventually to connect with others who shared my passion. The group's members were kind, their laughter infectious, and their stories a reminder that everyone carried burdens. They didn't pry into my past, and I didn't offer it, but their warmth was enough to make me feel seen again. Through the group, I met Claire. She was a local artist with a quick wit and a smile that seemed to brighten even the gloomiest days. We bonded over shared hikes and long conversations about art, life, and the quiet resilience it took to start over. With Claire, there was no pretense, no expectation. She didn't know the scars I carried, but she treated me as though they didn't matter. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: hope. Life in the coastal town wasn't perfect, but it was real. The pain of betrayal still lingered in quiet moments, like a distant echo. But it no longer defined me. Instead, my days were filled with the freedom to simply exist, to make choices without the weight of deception hanging over me. I could walk the beach at sunset, feeling the sand beneath my feet, and know that I was exactly where I needed to be. The friendships I formed were genuine, untainted by lies, and the hobbies I embraced brought a joy I hadn't felt in years. Each passing day solidified the realization that I had left not just a life of betrayal, but a version of myself that no longer served me. As I stood on the cliff one evening, watching the sun melt into the ocean, I felt a deep sense of peace. The waves crashed below, relentless and unyielding, a reminder that even after the storm, life continues. I had survived. More than that, I had found myself again. The scars would remain, but they no longer felt like wounds. Instead, they were proof of my resilience, a testament to the strength it took to let go and start anew. It was an ordinary afternoon when I spotted a familiar face in the small cafe where I often sat, sipping coffee and reflecting on my newfound life. Dan, an old friend from my previous life, stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes widening as they landed on me. The surprise on his face was palpable. I hadn't expected to see anyone from my past, much less someone who had once been a confidant. "Is it really you?" Dan asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and relief as he approached my table. "It's me," I replied calmly, gesturing for him to sit. The unease I thought I had left behind began to stir, but curiosity about the life I had left behind kept me grounded. Dan hesitated, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer, almost hesitant. "You know, everyone thought you just disappeared," he said. "No one had any idea where you went." "I needed to start over," I said simply, not offering more than I had to. Dan nodded, as if understanding the unspoken weight behind my words. Then his tone dropped, carrying the gravity of what he was about to say. "You missed a lot after you left," he began carefully. "Susan, well, things didn't go well for her." I leaned forward, my heartbeat quickening as he continued. It didn't take long for people to start noticing things. Her strange absences, the dinners with someone who wasn't you. Rumors started flying, and eventually the truth came out. Dan's voice grew quieter, laced with both pity and judgment. Her affair became public knowledge. People turned on her. Friends she'd known for years, even her own family. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was the audacity of how she carried it on, as if it wouldn't catch up to her. I listened silently, a mix of grim satisfaction and residual pain settling in my chest. "And Emily?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Dan shook his head. "That's where it gets worse. Emily blamed Susan for everything. Your leaving, the fallout. They had a massive argument from what I heard. Emily couldn't forgive her for dragging her into the lies. She moved out after graduation and hasn't spoken to Susan since. The image of my daughter cutting ties with her mother struck a chord I hadn't anticipated. I felt a pang of sadness for Emily, for the weight she must have carried, but another part of me recognized that this was the cost of betrayal. Susan's choices had shattered everything she held dear. Dan sighed, his gaze steady. Susan's alone now. No friends, no family. Whatever life she thought she was building, it's gone. I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. The fallout wasn't just a consequence. It was the inevitable conclusion to a web of lies that could no longer hold. As Dan spoke of Susan's isolation and Emily's estrangement, I felt no joy in their suffering, only closure. Their choices had led them here, and I had walked away. For the first time, I felt the final ties to my old life dissolve. The salty breeze carried with it a sense of renewal as I walked along the beach at sunset, the waves lapping at the shore in a rhythm that matched my steady breaths. It had been months since I'd left behind the life that once defined me, and now, standing here with the horizon stretching endlessly before me, I felt the weight of that past slipping away. The scars of betrayal were still there, faint reminders of a pain I once thought insurmountable, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they had become markers of growth, a testament to the resilience I had discovered within myself. Each day in this small coastal town brought a sense of peace that was once foreign to me. The solitude that had initially felt like an escape had transformed into something deeper, a quiet space to rediscover who I was outside the roles I had played as husband and father. I spent my mornings hiking trails that wound through cliffs and forests, the fresh air clearing my mind and filling me with a sense of purpose. My afternoons were often devoted to photography, capturing the world around me through a lens that seemed to mirror my own shifting perspective. Life here was simple, but it was mine. Despite my initial hesitation to engage with the community, the warmth of the people around me gradually began to draw me in. I found myself lingering longer at the local cafe, exchanging pleasantries that turned into genuine conversations. Joining the photography group had been a turning point, a decision that not only reignited a passion I thought I'd lost, but also introduced me to people who saw me as I was now, not as a man defined by his past. That's where I met Claire. She was seated at the edge of the group during a meeting, her laughter easy and her presence magnetic without trying to be. She was an artist, her fingers often smudged with paint, and her perspective on the world was refreshingly grounded. We began talking during group outings, our conversations flowing naturally from art to life to the little things that made us laugh. Claire had an uncanny way of putting me at ease, as though she instinctively understood the walls I had built around myself and had no intention of pushing past them before I was ready. She didn't pry into my past, but listened openly when I chose to share pieces of it. Her empathy wasn't performative, it was genuine, quiet, and unwavering. One evening, after a photography walk that ended with us sitting on a rocky outcrop overlooking the ocean, I found myself sharing more with her than I had intended. I spoke of the betrayal I had endured, the pain of leaving behind the life I had built, and the struggle to rebuild myself. Claire didn't interrupt or offer platitudes. She simply placed her hand over mine, her touch grounding me in the present. "It sounds like you've come so far," she said softly. "And the fact that you're here, that you've found beauty again, says more about your strength than anything else." Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways that evening. For the first time, I felt the possibility of something new, a connection untainted by lies or pain. It wasn't about replacing what I'd lost, but about embracing what lay ahead. The man who had driven away from his old life that morning now felt like a distant memory. Standing on the beach as the waves crashed at my feet, I realized that the freedom I had sought wasn't just from betrayal, but from the version of myself who had been weighed down by it. With Claire, with this town, and with the life I was building anew, I finally felt hope, a quiet, steady flame lighting the path forward. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting the sky in hues of amber and lavender as I stood barefoot on the cool sand. The steady rhythm of the waves echoed in my chest, a constant reminder of life's unyielding cycles, of beginnings, endings, and the spaces in between. This spot had become my sanctuary, a place where the past felt distant and the present tangible. As I gazed at the ocean, its endless expanse reflected the journey I had traveled. The pain of betrayal, once a searing wound, had softened into something less sharp, a scar that told a story but no longer hurt to touch. I thought of Susan and Emily, not with anger or sadness, but with quiet acceptance. They were part of my life's fabric, threads that had unraveled but still shaped who I was. I would always carry those memories, but they no longer defined me. For so long, I had clung to the illusion of control, the belief that love, loyalty, and trust were unbreakable bonds. When they shattered, I thought I had lost myself too. But in the aftermath, I discovered something unexpected: strength. Not the kind born of defiance or anger, but the quiet resilience that comes from enduring, from standing back up when the world tries to knock you down. My thoughts drifted to the life I had rebuilt here, the mornings spent chasing sunlight with my camera, the hikes that cleared my mind, and the connections I had forged. And then there was Claire, a presence that felt steady and true, unburdened by the weight of my past. She reminded me that it was possible to trust again, to hope without fear. I smiled at the thought of her, a warmth blooming in my chest that felt both foreign and familiar. As the final sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The ocean before me was vast and unpredictable, much like life itself. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. It felt liberating. I took a deep breath, letting the salty air fill my lungs, and closed my eyes. The past had shaped me, but it no longer chained me. In its place was something stronger, a quiet, unwavering belief that I was more than my pain, that I could create a future defined not by what I had lost, but by what I had found. As the waves kissed the shore, I turned and walked back toward the life I had chosen, my steps steady, my heart full. For the first time in years, I felt whole.